The forward operating base sat in the middle of a landscape that seemed to stretch forever, flat sand, broken only by jagged rock and concrete barriers. Helicopters whined in the distance, their rotors chopping through the heavy desert air. Humvees rumbled past, leaving dust clouds hanging like ghosts in the scorching heat. Soldiers moved in clusters, some laughing, some exhausted, all carrying the invisible weight of combat on their shoulders. The base was alive, but in the hangar, silence ruled. The hangar wasn't much to look at, an oversized, steel-framed shell patched with corrugated iron and sandbags. Inside, it smelled of oil, gunpowder residue, and the faint metallic tang of weapons that had seen too many battles. Gear was stacked in crates along the walls. Helmets, rucksacks, ammunition boxes marked with stenciled black lettering. The hum of a generator provided a constant, low background noise. Commander Michael Rains stepped through the wide doors and paused. He had come here with the intention of checking in on the weapons team and ensuring readiness before the next patrol. But something drew his eyes immediately, something that didn't fit the usual rhythm of the hangar. At the far end of the room, sitting cross-legged on a wooden crate, was a woman. She wasn't talking, wasn't joking around like the other soldiers. She was focused, her hands moving with meticulous care over a weapon that commanded attention all on its own, the Barrett M82A1. Chambered in .50 BMG, a massive sniper rifle lay disassembled across a cloth, its black steel gleaming under the overhead lights. Rains slowed his steps, watching her. She worked methodically. The barrel cradled in her lap, the bolt assembly carefully set aside, each component cleaned and inspected with surgical precision. Every motion was deliberate, practiced. No wasted movement. The kind of precision that came only from someone who didn't just know their weapon, but lived with it. The Barrett wasn't a rifle for the casual shooter. At nearly 30 pounds, it was more cannon than gun, designed to stop vehicles, punch through concrete, and send rounds across impossible distances. Most snipers favored lighter rifles, bolt-action designs that offered control and concealment. But here was this woman, small in frame, compared to the beast she handled, working on it as though it were nothing more than a familiar companion. Rains leaned against a crate near the entrance, folding his arms. He didn't want to interrupt yet. He wanted to see how long she would take before acknowledging him. Minutes passed. She continued her work without a glance in his direction. Her dark hair was tied back in a tight braid, her sleeves rolled neatly above her elbows. Sweat from the desert heat clung to her skin, but her focus never wavered. She ran a cloth down the length of the barrel, her fingers steady, her eyes scanning for imperfections invisible to most. Finally, she reassembled the bolt, locked it back into place, and laid the rifle across her knees. Only then did she speak, her voice even, calm, and without the faintest hint of surprise. "You've been watching me for a while." Rains arched an eyebrow. "That obvious?" "Obvious enough," she said, finally looking up. Her eyes were sharp, steady sniper's eyes. The kind that measured everything and gave nothing away. Rains pushed off the crate and stepped closer. Not many people choose the Barrett as their go-to rifle. She tilted her head slightly, almost as if the comment amused her. It's heavy, unforgiving, and punishes mistakes. Most don't have the patience for it. She set the rifle gently into its case, her hands lingering a moment longer on the weapon. "But I've always liked a challenge." The commander studied her face. There was no arrogance in her tone, no bravado. Just a quiet certainty, as if her bond with the rifle was less about firepower and more about discipline. "You shoot it often?" he asked, a small shrug. "When I have to." He chuckled softly. "That's a vague answer." "Vague answers keep people from asking too many questions," she replied, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles before vanishing just as quickly. Rains liked that. He respected soldiers who didn't feel the need to prove themselves with words. Still, something about her presence unsettled him, not in a threatening way, but in the sense that he was standing in the orbit of someone who carried a story much bigger than she allowed the world to see. Nearby, 2 operators walked past, giving her a respectful nod as they exited the hangar. Rains noticed the way they glanced at her, subtle, almost reverent. Not fear, not dismissal, but acknowledgement. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What's your name, Sergeant?" "Collins," she answered simply. "Well, Collins," he said, his eyes flicking down at the massive rifle again. "That's one hell of a weapon you've got there." She closed the rifle case, latching it with a soft click. "It's just a tool," she said quietly. "Same as any other. It's what you do with it that matters." Her words struck him more deeply than he expected. Most soldiers he knew, especially ones who carried the Barrett, spoke of the rifle like it was a badge of honor, a symbol of destructive power. Collins treated it like a responsibility. Rains opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, another operator strolled by, carrying a stack of ammo cans. He caught Rains's gaze and leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for the commander to hear. "You know who she is, right?" Rains frowned slightly. "Collins?" "Just met her." The operator's eyes widened. "That's the Collins. Longest confirmed kill on record. Over 3 kilometers. You're looking at a legend." And then he was gone, disappearing into the glare outside the hangar. Rains stood there for a long moment, staring at her. She said nothing, didn't acknowledge the overheard comment. She just sat calmly, hands folded over the closed rifle case, as if she were waiting for the next mission. He realized then that he had stumbled onto someone extraordinary, not because of the weapon in her hands, but because of the silence she wrapped around herself. Most men would brag, exaggerate, boast endlessly about an achievement like hers. She didn't. She carried it like a shadow, quiet, unspoken, permanent. Rains finally spoke, his voice low. "Is it true?" Collins looked up, her expression unreadable. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer at all. Then she said softly, "Records are just numbers. What matters is the lives you save." And with that, she stood, lifting the heavy rifle case with ease, and walked past him without another word. Rains turned his head slightly, watching her disappear into the sunlight outside. His chest tightened with something that felt a lot like respect. He had come into the hangar looking for weapons. Instead, he had found a story. A story he suddenly wanted to know more about. The Barrett lay across the table like a black steel dragon, its length consuming the space, its presence undeniable. Commander Rains had seen plenty of rifles in his career, M4S M110s, even the old bolt-action M24s favored by Army snipers. But the Barrett was different. It wasn't just a rifle. It was a statement. It spoke of distance, destruction, and dominance on the battlefield. It wasn't the kind of weapon you cleaned casually, like a sidearm or a carbine. Yet here was Sergeant Collins, treating it with the same calm intimacy as if she were maintaining a family heirloom. Her motions were fluid, deliberate, almost ritualistic. She worked the cleaning rod down the barrel with the same rhythm a soldier might march with. Each pass of the cloth was precise, her fingers steady, her breathing even. No wasted movements, no hesitation. Rains watched closely, caught by something he couldn't quite name. There was a grace in the way she moved. Not softness grace. The kind born of repetition, of discipline, of absolute familiarity. He had seen men fumble with their rifles after years of training, hands nervous, unsure, betraying cracks in confidence. But Collins looked like she could reassemble the Barrett blindfolded in a sandstorm. "Not many can handle that rifle," Rains said at last, breaking the silence. Collins didn't look up. She ran a cloth over the bolt assembly, checking every ridge, every groove. Her voice was calm, controlled. Most don't have the patience. They think it's about strength, about carrying the weight. It's not. What's it about then? He asked. Her eyes flicked up, meeting his briefly, sharp and unwavering. Control, respect. The Barrett doesn't forgive mistakes. You either master it, or it owns you. Rain smirked faintly. He liked her answer. It was the kind of philosophy he'd heard echoed in SEAL training, in the endless drills that broke men down and rebuilt them into something sharper, stronger. But hearing it applied to a rifle, this rifle struck something deeper. He shifted his weight, watching her hands move again, oiling the receiver. You talk about it like it's alive. Collins gave the faintest shrug. Maybe it is. Every weapon has a personality. Some rifles are simple, predictable. The Barrett. She tapped the long barrel lightly with her fingertip. The Barrett demands respect. It makes you work for every shot. Rains chuckled softly. Sounds like you know it better than most. She didn't reply, only continued working. That silence measured, intentional spoke louder than any boast. Around them, a hangar carried on its business. A mechanic wrestled with the paneling of a Humvee, sparks flying from his power tool. A pair of Marines argued good-naturedly over a deck of cards, their laughter bouncing off the steel walls. But in Collins's corner, the world seemed still, focused, narrowed to the bond between sniper and rifle. Rains found himself strangely compelled. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by soldiers. His rank alone demanded attention. Yet Collins barely acknowledged him, unless he asked direct questions. She was absorbed in her task, unconcerned with hierarchy. You've used it in combat, then, Rains said, leaning a little closer, trying to draw her out. Of course. How many kills? Her hands froze for just a fraction of a second, so brief he almost missed it. Then she continued, sliding the bolt back into place. That's not something worth counting. Rains blinked. Every sniper he had known kept score, even if they didn't admit it aloud. Some carried it like a badge of honor, others like a weight they couldn't put down. But none dismissed the question so completely. Most snipers would disagree, he said carefully. Collins looked up again, and this time there was steel in her eyes. Most snipers are wrong. Numbers don't matter. What matters is whether the mission succeeds, whether lives are saved, whether the people under your protection get to go home. Her words struck him harder than he expected. There was no bravado in them, no hint of ego, just conviction. For the first time in a long while, Rains felt slightly out of his depth. He prided himself on reading people quickly, on knowing which men were dangerous, which were dependable, which were full of hot air. But Collins didn't fit neatly into any of those boxes. She was something else entirely. He took a step closer, crouching slightly so he could meet her eye level. You don't carry it like most do, he said. Her brow furrowed faintly. Carry what? The Barrett. The role. The responsibility. Her gaze softened slightly, though only for a moment. It's not a role. It's who I am. You don't pick up a rifle like this and put it down again. It stays with you. Every shot, every trigger pull, every second you wait behind the scope. You carry it forever, whether you want to or not. Rains felt a chill crawl down his spine, even in the sweltering desert heat. The Barrett wasn't just steel in her hands. It was a part of her. A part forged in long hours, impossible shots, and choices most people would never face. He tried to imagine her out in the field, prone on some barren ridge, the Barrett braced against her shoulder, staring down a target thousands of meters away. The patience, the calculation, The steadiness required, it was staggering. "You talk like someone who's seen too much," he said quietly. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sadder. "We've all seen too much." Silence stretched between them. Rains finally nodded, straightening up. "Fair enough." Collins returned her attention to the rifle, reassembling it piece by piece, her fingers swift and certain. When she was finished, she slid the massive weapon into its case, latching it closed with a solid click. She ran her hand across the lid once, almost absent-mindedly, then leaned back against the crate with a sigh. For the first time, she looked tired. Not physically, though, war carved lines into every soldier eventually, but something deeper. The kind of fatigue that came from carrying memories you couldn't set down. Rains wanted to ask more. He wanted to know where she had been, what she had done, what ghosts she carried in silence. But something in her posture told him she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. So instead, he shifted the subject, keeping his tone lighter. "You know, most people would brag about being able to handle that rifle. You act like it's nothing." Collins's eyes flicked to his, sharp again. "That's because it's not about bragging. You don't brag about carrying fire in your hands. You just make sure you don't get burned." The words lingered long after she fell silent again. Rains nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he repeated. Then, after a pause, "I'd like to see you shoot sometime." Collins tilted her head slightly, studying him as if weighing his intent. Then, without smiling, without softening, she said simply, "Maybe you will." And just like that, the conversation ended. But the rifle, the Barrett, .50, cleaned and gleaming, spoke louder than anything else. It told him she was more than a soldier. She was a marksman, an artist of precision, a guardian who carried her craft with the gravity of life and death. And Commander Rains knew, without a shred of doubt, that this wasn't the last time he would find himself drawn into the quiet orbit of Sergeant Collins. The hangar door groaned open as another wave of soldiers passed through, their boots thudding against the concrete floor. The noise was background chatter compared to the silence radiating from the corner where Sergeant Collins had settled. Commander Rains still lingered, his arms crossed, his eyes drawn back to the closed Barrett case at her feet. Something about the rifle, something about her, refused to let his mind wander elsewhere. He wasn't the only one who noticed. A corporal carrying a box of rations walked by and gave Collins a nod, deferential, almost cautious. A pair of Marines setting down ammo crates glanced in her direction, whispering to one another with quick, darting eyes. Rains caught the exchange immediately. Soldiers didn't look at just anyone that way. Curiosity tightened in his chest. "All right," he muttered under his breath. "Who the hell are you, Collins?" As if the universe had heard him, one of his men, Petty Officer James Hawk Hawkins, strolled in, helmet tucked under one arm. Hawk had been with Rains long enough to know his commander's moods, and he followed Rains's gaze straight to Collins. A grin tugged at his lips. "You didn't tell me she was here," Hawk said, his voice pitched just above a whisper. Rains frowned. "And who exactly is she?" Hawk's grin faded into something closer to disbelief. He set his helmet on a crate and leaned in. "Sir, you really don't know?" Rains shook his head slowly. "That's Sergeant Collins," Hawk said, his tone lower now, almost reverent. "The sniper. The one with the record." Rains blinked. "What record?" Hawk glanced around, as if worried Collins might overhear him, though she showed no sign of listening. She was rolling her shoulders, stretching her arms, the quiet routine of someone finished with maintenance and ready for whatever came next. 3,248 meters, Hawk said finally. "That's her confirmed kill." The number hit Rains like a bullet to the chest. He straightened, his brows furrowing. 3,000? That's 2 miles. Hawk nodded. Longest confirmed sniper kill on record. NATO forces logged it. I heard the Canadians held the record before her, but Collins. He exhaled, shaking his head. She blew it away, literally. Rains looked back at her. Suddenly, the Barrett case at her feet seemed heavier, sharper. The way she carried herself, the calm, the silence made sense now. She didn't need to brag. The legend spoke for her. "You're telling me that small woman," Rains said carefully, "pulled off a shot 2 miles?" Hawk grinned again, though it carried more awe than humor. "Small women can do big things, sir. Don't let her size fool you. I've heard guys say she's patient as a stone and cold as winter when she's on the scope. The kind of calm you can't teach." Rains felt the air thicken around him. He'd heard stories about record shots before tailies, traded in barracks and bars, half-truths exaggerated into myth. But Hawk wasn't the kind of man to waste his breath on fantasy. If he said Collins had done it, then she had. And now here she was, in his hangar, acting as if she were nobody special. Rains took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Collins glanced up as he approached, her expression unchanged, her eyes steady. 3,248, Rains said, his voice even. Her brow rose ever so slightly. "Excuse me? That's the number, isn't it? The shot." She didn't flinch, didn't deny it. For a long moment, she just looked at him, measuring him in silence the way a sniper measures distance through a scope. Finally, she spoke. "Numbers are just numbers, Commander." "That's not what your reputation says," he pressed. "Reputation is noise," she replied softly, almost dismissively. "Noise doesn't save lives. Precision does." Her words landed heavy. She wasn't bragging. She wasn't confirming or denying. She was shrugging it off, as though saving a valley of soldiers with an impossible shot was just another day at work. Rains felt both impressed and unsettled. He had commanded elite men, men who could swim miles underwater, reach doors under fire, survive in conditions that would break most. But even among warriors, there was always someone who carried a different kind of gravity. Collins had it. The unshakable calm of someone who had stared down the impossible and won. "You don't strike me as the type who keeps score," Rains said finally. "I don't," Collins answered. "But others do. They like their legends neat, tidy, easy to retell. Long shots, long kills, they make good stories. But no one ever talks about the hours before the trigger, the calculations, the waiting, the stillness." Her gaze dropped briefly to the Barrett case at her feet. "No one ever talks about what comes after, either." The way she said it quiet, flat chilled him more than the desert night ever could. Rains wanted to push further, to ask her what it felt like, what she saw through that scope, what it meant to carry a record like that. But something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was something heavier, something she wasn't ready to share. So he backed off, taking a slow breath. "You know," he said instead, trying to ease the weight in the air, "guys around here already talk about you like you're some kind of ghost story. The woman with the impossible shot." Collins's lips twitched faintly, the closest thing he'd seen to a smile. "Let them. Ghost stories keep people sharp." And just like that, she turned her attention back to her deer, unbothered by the way her name had just shaken the commander himself. Rains stood there a moment longer, the echo of Hawk's words still in his mind. 3,248 meters. It was more than a number. It was a line in history. A line drawn by the quiet, unassuming soldier in front of him. And for the first time since he had set foot in the hangar, Commander Rains understood something. Collins wasn't just another operator. She was a reminder that legends weren't always loud. Sometimes they sat in silence, cleaning their rifle, and let the whispers do the rest. The mountains were merciless. They rose like broken teeth against the sky, jagged ridges of stone that carved shadows into the valley below. The air was thin, each breath a reminder of altitude, of distance from comfort and safety. Wind whispered constantly, tugging at gear, biting at exposed skin. The terrain was the kind that punished mistakes, where a single misstep could send you tumbling into oblivion. Sergeant Collins lay prone on the ridge, her body pressed into the cold earth. Her rifle stretched out before her like an extension of her own frame. The Barrett was heavy, yes, but its weight felt right here, solid against the shifting elements. Beside her, Corporal Myers, her spotter, adjusted his binoculars and checked the laser rangefinder again. 3248, Myers muttered, his voice low. Confirmed. Collins didn't reply. She was already in the zone, her breathing slowed, her pulse steady. Below them, chaos brewed. Through her scope, she could see them, the enemy commander surrounded by his fighters, their movements too disciplined to be dismissed as random patrol. Trucks were parked haphazardly, weapons mounted, men spreading out in a fan-shaped arc. It wasn't just movement. It was coordination. They're setting up an ambush, Myers whispered, as if reading her mind. Collins exhaled softly. She could see it too, the commander gesturing, pointing, orchestrating the placement of men with practiced precision. If left unchecked, the force below would cut into the Allied convoy, expected to move through the valley within the hour. She adjusted the scope, her gloved fingers smooth against the dial. At this distance, the commander was a blur to the naked eye, just another figure in the dust. But through her lens, he was clear. Every detail sharpened. The tilt of his head, the way he barked orders, the rifle slung carelessly across his back. Wind? She asked softly. Myers lifted the kestrel, reading the numbers, feeling the breeze across his cheek. 8 miles an hour, left to right. Temps dropping. Air density's thin up here, you'll get some drift. She adjusted again. The math ran through her head automatically. Bullet drop, Coriolis effect, barometric pressure. Every factor a thread in the invisible web, stretching between her and her target. She didn't rush. She couldn't. A shot like this wasn't instinct, it was calculation married to patience. Spotting round? Myers suggested. She shook her head. No time. They're moving. Indeed, the fighters were spreading out farther, their formation tightening into the jaws of a trap. The convoy wouldn't stand a chance. Target confirmed, Myers said, his voice calm but taut with urgency. Commander, 3248 meters. You're clear to engage. Collins inhaled slowly, her chest expanding, her finger brushing the trigger guard. The Barrett was a monster, its recoil notorious, its report deafening. Firing it was less like pulling a trigger and more like unleashing controlled chaos. But Collins was calm. She had spent years mastering the beast. She centered the crosshairs on the target's chest, adjusted 0.5 mil left for wind, a fraction low for drop. She let the world narrow. No trucks, no fighters, no rocks, no sky. Just the target. Just the line between life and death, stretched impossibly thin across nearly 2 miles of earth and air. Her finger curled against the trigger. The Barrett roared. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, a familiar hammering force. Dust kicked up around her as the massive round tore through the air, faster than sound, faster than thought. Seconds passed. Long, heavy seconds. Through the scope, she watched the commander. He gestured once more to his men. Then he dropped, collapsed backward into the dirt, motionless. Chaos erupted below. Fighters scrambled, some ducking, some firing wildly into the ridgeline, but they had no hope of seeing her. Trucks revved, men shouted, formation disintegrated into confusion. Impact. Myers breathed, his voice cracking with exhilaration. Direct hit. 3248. But Collins didn't cheer. Didn't even move. She kept her eye on the scope, watching the dust swirl around the fallen commander, watching his men scatter like ants from a broken hill. One shot, one life ended. Countless others saved. Finally, she lowered her cheek from the stock, exhaling the breath she'd held since the trigger pull. Myers laughed softly, shaking his head in disbelief. Jesus, Collins. That's one for the history books. She said nothing. Because history didn't matter. Numbers didn't matter. What mattered was the convoy would now pass safely through the valley, unaware of the shadow that had nearly swallowed them whole. What mattered was that her brothers in arms would live another day. Still, she felt it the weight. Not the rifle's weight, but the invisible kind settling heavy in her chest. A shot like that wasn't just precision. It wasn't just calculation. It was a choice. And once made, it could never be unmade. She began breaking down the Barrett, moving with the same deliberate rhythm as always. Cleaning, caring, resetting for the next time duty called. Myers kept shaking his head, muttering under his breath. 3248. Nobody's ever gonna believe it. Collins allowed herself the faintest of smiles, though it never reached her eyes. Let them believe what they want. The wind shifted again, colder now, tugging at her braid, whispering across the barren ridge. The mission wasn't over. It never was. She packed the Barrett into its case, stood and scanned the horizon. Somewhere down there, lives had just been spared. Somewhere else, another battle waited. Collins shouldered the case. The ridge swallowed their footprints as they moved out, leaving behind nothing but silence. And the record-breaking shot carried on the wind, already beginning its transformation from fact into legend. The ridge was quiet, but inside Collins' head, numbers screamed. Sniping wasn't about pulling a trigger. It was about solving a problem written in air, gravity, and time. At 3,248 meters, the problem was nearly unsolvable. Nearly. She settled into the dirt again, pressing the cold rock against her cheek, body molded to the earth as though she had grown from it. The Barrett rested on its bipod like a great beast chained to the mountain. Her hands were steady, her breathing low, her pulse whisper-soft. All her years of training had led her here, and yet nothing in manuals or simulations could match this moment. Range locked, Myers said beside her, his voice taut. 3248. Confirmed again. Collins gave the faintest nod. The rangefinder had been double-checked, triple-checked, and still Myers' voice trembled with disbelief. It wasn't just a long shot. It was the shot the kind most snipers would never attempt, let alone land. Wind, left to right, 8 miles an hour, Myers continued. Temperature 38 degrees. Altitude. I've got it. Collins cut him off gently. Her brain already raced to the factors, translating his words into equations she could feel more than think. At this distance, the bullet wouldn't just fall, it would plummet. She pictured the trajectory arcing across the valley, a parabola drawn by physics and fate. Gravity would drag the .50 cal round downward at terrifying speed. Spindrift would nudge it rightward. The Coriolis effect, the spin of the Earth itself, would pull it farther still. Even the heat shimmer rising off the rocks threatened to bend its path. Most soldiers saw a rifle as a weapon. Collins saw it as a conversation with the universe. Every trigger pull asked a question. Every impact was the answer. Correction, Myers muttered, recalculating. 1/4 mil left. 1/2 mil high. She adjusted her scope, precise clicks that echoed in her bones. Through the glass, the world narrowed again. The enemy commander stood in the dust, shouting, gesturing, oblivious. Around him, fighters adjusted their positions, rifles slung. eyes scanning for prey they didn't know was perched miles away above them. Collins slowed her breathing further. Inhale, pause, exhale. The trick wasn't just stillness. It was timing. A sniper didn't fight their body. They synchronized with it. Each heartbeat shook the barrel, however slightly. A rushed shot at this distance meant certain failure. No, she had to become part of the rhythm. The wind's whisper, the mountain's silence, the steady drum of blood in her ears. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her pulse dipped. The window opened. Her finger rested on the trigger. Not pulling, not pressing, just feeling the metal, learning its tension, knowing the exact point where resistance would break. The Barrett's trigger was no mystery to her. It was an old companion, always honest, always unforgiving. Myers swallowed hard beside her. You only get one shot at this. She didn't look away from the scope. That's all I need. And in that moment, time fractured. The valley below blurred into silence. The trucks, the fighters, even Myers' presence beside her, all dissolved into shadows. There was only her, the rifle, and the man in her crosshairs. The distance vanished. The math became instinct. She could feel the bullet's journey before it began. The long arc across invisible air, the drop, the drift, the spin. Her body was still, but her mind reached out, bridging the miles in a way flesh could not. Now, her finger curled. The break was clean, effortless, like snapping a thread. The Barrett thundered, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. Dust blasted upward, rocks shuddered. The mountain itself seemed to flinch at the release of such violence. The shell casing ejected with a metallic clang, spinning into the dirt. And then silence. The bullet tore through the air, unseen, unstoppable. At 3,000 meters, flight time wasn't measured in fractions of a second. It was a lifetime compressed into moments. The round arced upward, then downward, dragged by gravity, nudged by wind, bent by the invisible forces she had calculated and accounted for. Seconds stretched into eternities. Collins didn't blink, didn't breathe. She tracked the commander through her scope, eyes locked, waiting for reality to answer the question she had asked. The man turned, barked one last order, and crumpled. Dust erupted around him as his body hit the ground, arms sprawling lifelessly. Fighters nearby froze in disbelief, staring at their fallen leader as though struck by lightning. Then chaos exploded. Impact. Myers hissed, eyes wide behind his binos. Direct impact. Confirmed Jesus Christ. Collins, you hit him. But she didn't smile. Didn't cheer. She just exhaled, a long, steady breath, releasing the tension that had bound her chest like iron. It was done. The bullet had traveled 2 miles across open terrain, across wind and gravity, across the spinning earth itself, and it had found its mark. Below, the enemy fighters broke formation, some firing blindly into the mountainside, others scrambling for cover, others fleeing outright. The ambush dissolved into panic. The convoy would be safe. Collins eased her finger off the trigger, her hands calm, precise, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She reached for another magazine, not because she planned to fire again, but because the ritual grounded her. Keep working. Keep focused. Don't think. Myers laughed in disbelief, shaking his head, his hands trembling. 3,248 meters. Collins, that's impossible. Do you understand what you just did? But she didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on the fallen man in the scope, the dust slowly settling around his body. The shot would be remembered. It would be studied, recorded, maybe even celebrated. But for her, it wasn't glory. It was weight. Because no matter the distance, no matter the mathematics, every trigger pull carried the same truth. One life ended, others spared. And that truth never came light. She finally lowered her head from the scope, rubbing the grit from her cheek. The mountain wind swept her hair back, cool against the sweat on her neck. "Pack it up," she murmured. Myers hesitated, still gaping at her. Then he obeyed, folding his gear with clumsy hands. Collins moved smoothly, breaking down the Barrett, stowing each part with ritual precision. Cleaning could come later, but the process always began here with discipline, with care. As they rose from the ridge, Myers cast one last look at the valley below. Nobody's ever going to believe it. Collins adjusted the Barrett's case over her shoulder, her face unreadable. "Doesn't matter if they believe it," she said softly. "What matters is they're alive." They hiked away, their silhouettes swallowed by the rocks. The mountain fell quiet again, as if the shot had never been fired. Only the fighters below, scattered and broken, remained to tell the tale. And far beyond the valley, across borders and timelines, the story of a single bullet would begin its transformation from record into legend. The ridge was behind them, but the silence lingered. Collins and Myers descended the rocky slope in steady silence, their boots crunching against loose stone. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the valley, as if even the mountains wanted to conceal what had just happened. The mission was successful, the ambush broken, the Allied convoy safe, but victory felt heavier than triumph should. Myers still couldn't stop glancing at her, his lips twitching with unspoken words. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be told and retold in barracks, briefing rooms, and sniper schools for years. But he could also sense something different in Collins, a stillness that wasn't pride, wasn't relief. It was weight. Back at the forward operating base, word spread quickly. By the time Collins stepped through the gate, operators and soldiers alike were already murmuring, trading fragments of what they'd heard. 3 kilometers. No, more than that. Single shot, dropped him instantly. The story grew like wildfire, exaggerated in details, but always returning to the same core. Collins had done the impossible. Inside the weapons room, she sat cross-legged on the floor, Barrett laid across her lap. Cleaning kits sprawled beside her like a surgeon's instruments. Her hands moved with ritual precision: rod, patch, solvent, brush. Each pass through the barrel was deliberate. Her focus narrowed not on the chatter outside, but on the steel before her. The Barrett was more than a weapon. It was an anchor. She had to break it down, clean it, restore it. The ritual kept her grounded. Without it, she would start to think too much about what had just happened. Myers leaned against the wall nearby, watching her in silence. His usual energy, his constant commentary, was absent. He wanted to celebrate, to tell her she had cemented herself as a legend, but he knew better than to break the quiet. Finally, he spoke, voice low. "That was history, Collins. No one's ever done that before." Her hands paused briefly on the cleaning rod. She didn't look up. It wasn't history. It was math. Right place, right time. He frowned. "No, that was you. Nobody else could have pulled that shot off." She pushed the rod through the barrel, the metallic sound sharp in the small room. Somebody had to do it. That's all. Myers fell silent again. He understood what she wasn't saying. For Collins, every shot was duty. Every trigger pull was necessity. She didn't carry kills like trophies. She carried them like stones, each one added to the weight pressing down on her chest. Later, alone in her quarters, Collins lay on her cot staring at the ceiling. The desert wind rattled the thin walls, a reminder of the vast emptiness just outside. She should have been exhausted, but her mind wouldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the commander through her scope, his face blurred by distance, yet frozen forever in her memory. She remembered the way he gestured to his men, unaware that death was already in motion, already crossing the valley toward him. She remembered the seconds of silence between the shot and its impact, the unbearable stillness that carried the weight of fate. And she remembered the way he fell, a life snuffed out at the edge of sight. Collins rolled onto her side, gripping her dog tags. She told herself the truth she always returned to. He had been orchestrating an ambush that would have slaughtered dozens of allied soldiers. Her shot had saved lives. It had been necessary. But necessity didn't make it lighter. The following days were filled with quiet recognition. Higher-ups called her into briefings, congratulated her with clipped military formality, and scribbled notes for after-action reports. The kill was confirmed, logged, and recorded. Whispers of awards circled, though Collins tried to ignore them. For her, paperwork didn't change what had happened. Among the operators, her reputation shifted. Men who once barely noticed her now nodded with respect when she entered the room. Some offered congratulations. Others gave her space, as if uncertain whether to treat her as comrade or legend. Collins met it all with the same quiet composure. She didn't want their praise. She didn't want to be a story. Late one night, the SEAL commander found her in the hangar, sitting cross-legged again with the Barrett across her lap. He had heard the whispers, but unlike the others, he wanted to see for himself. "You're the one," he said, his voice echoing softly in the empty space. Collins didn't look up. "That depends on what you've heard." He stepped closer, studying her hands as they moved over the weapon. "I heard you made a shot from over 3,000 meters. That true?" Her eyes flicked up briefly, then back to the rifle. "Numbers don't matter. What matters is the convoy made it through." The commander tilted his head, intrigued. Most operators he knew would have embraced the glory, claimed the kill with pride. But Collins deflected it, burying herself in the ritual of cleaning instead. "Doesn't eat at you?" he asked. "Knowing you hold the record?" She finally met his gaze. Her eyes were steady, unflinching, but beneath the calm, there was something else await that only those who had taken lives could recognize. Records are for competitions. This isn't a competition. It's war. The commander nodded slowly, understanding. He had seen the same haunted look in others before, warriors who carried their kills, not on their chests, but on their souls. That night, after he left, Collins sat in the hangar long after her rifle gleamed clean, her hands idle. The silence pressed on her like the mountain air had, heavy and relentless. She closed her eyes, and again the shot replayed over and over, as if time itself refused to let her move on. The kill would be written down in reports, studied by trainers, admired by young recruits. But none of them would feel the seconds of silence that stretched across the valley. None would understand the crushing responsibility of holding another life in their sights for nearly 2 miles. For Collins, the burden wasn't in the record. The burden was in the memory, the stillness, the calculation, the finality. And she knew it would never leave her. The hangar was quiet again, long after most of the base had gone to sleep. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting pale shadows on rows of vehicles and equipment. In the far corner, as always, Collins sat cross-legged with the Barrett stretched across her lap. She had already cleaned the rifle that morning. There was no real need to repeat the process, but the ritual grounded her. Every sweep of the brush, every check of the chamber, every click of the bolt sliding back and forth, it was meditation as much as maintenance. The SEAL commander stepped into the hangar quietly, hands in his pockets. He watched her for a moment without speaking. He'd seen men tinker with weapons out of pride, polishing them as if they were trophies. Collins was different. She touched the rifle with respect, as though it were a burden she carried willingly, but never celebrated. "You're in here more than anywhere else," he said finally, his voice low but carrying across the empty space. Collins didn't look up. "It's quiet here." The commander walked closer, his boots echoing against the concrete. He crouched a few feet away, studying her. Most people would be in the wrecked tent right now. Cards, music, laughter. "You don't like any of that?" She shrugged, wiping the barrel with a clean cloth. "Noise isn't my thing." He smiled faintly. "Noise isn't mine either. That's why I came here." For a moment, silence returned. The commander studied her face. She was calm, but not relaxed like a coil wound tightly, holding its shape even at rest. He knew the type. Operators who lived with ghosts tended to wear the same expression. "You know," he said, leaning against a crate, "I've been with SEAL teams for a long time. Seen some incredible shots. But what you did, I've never heard of anything like it." Collins' hands paused for a fraction of a second before resuming their work. It was math. A long equation, that's all. He tilted his head. "You believe that?" She looked up at him now, eyes steady. "Belief has nothing to do with it. At that distance, it's math or it's luck." Math worked. The commander chuckled quietly, though his gaze remained sharp. "And luck had nothing to do with it?" Collins considered the question, then set the rifle aside. She leaned back against the crate, folding her arms loosely. "Luck is for people who don't prepare. I don't rely on luck." That answer struck him as both defiance and humility. She wasn't bragging. She was stating fact, as blunt as a field report. "You ever think about what that shot means?" he asked carefully. She met his eyes without flinching. "Every day." He nodded slowly. He could tell she wasn't referring to records or history. She was speaking about the weight, the consequence, the unspoken cost. "Most men I've served with," he said after a pause, "would be drinking themselves blind right now, bragging to anyone who would listen about a shot like that. But you sit here, alone, cleaning a rifle that's already spotless." "Why?" Collins exhaled through her nose, considering. "Because celebrating doesn't bring back the dead. And because the next mission always comes. There's no finish line in this work." The commander studied her, respect deepening with every word. She wasn't cold, she was disciplined. She wasn't detached, she was bearing the burden in silence because she refused to let it break her. "You remind me of someone I served with years ago," he said finally. "A sniper. Different branch, different war. Same eyes, though. Same weight. He used to say the hardest part wasn't the shot, it was living with it afterward." Collins looked down at the Barrett resting across her lap, her hand brushing against the cool steel. He was right. They sat in silence again, the kind of silence that wasn't awkward but heavy with shared understanding. Neither needed to fill it with empty words. Finally, the commander broke it. "Do you know what makes you different?" She arched an eyebrow. "Other than sitting alone in a hangar with a rifle?" He smiled. "You don't chase glory. You don't want the story told. But whether you want it or not, people are going to remember. That record your shot, it's already legend." Collins shook her head. "Legends don't matter. Soldiers on that convoy matter. They're alive because of that shot. That's enough." The commander leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That's what makes you dangerous, you know? Not the rifle. Not the record. The fact that you understand the difference." Her eyes flicked up, meeting his again. For the first time, there was a hint of softness there, not vulnerability, but acknowledgement. She recognized his words as truth. "Dangerous isn't the word I'd use," she murmured. "What word would you use?" She considered for a long moment, then answered quietly, "Necessary." The commander nodded, respecting the answer. He had spent years leading men into impossible situations, asking them to do unthinkable things. He knew the difference between those who fought for pride and those who fought because it was necessary. Collins was firmly the latter. After a moment, he stood, brushing dust from his uniform. "You know," he said, "I could use someone like you training my guys. You've got more to teach than any manual." Collins smiled faintly, the expression brief and almost tired. "I'm not a teacher. I'm a soldier." He tilted his head. Sometimes the best teachers are soldiers who never meant to be. Think about it. With that, he turned and started toward the hangar doors. Before he stepped out into the night, he paused and glanced back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I respect the hell out of you. Not just for the shot, for how you carry it." Collins didn't respond. She simply nodded, then lowered her gaze back to the rifle, her fingers tracing the cool metal. When the commander left, the hangar was quiet again. She sat there for a long time, her mind echoing with his words. Respect wasn't what she sought, but hearing it from someone who understood, it mattered more than she wanted to admit. And though she wouldn't say it aloud, she respected him too, not for his rank, not for his reputation, but for the fact that he had seen her, really seen her, without judgment. For the first time since the shot, she felt a little less alone. Morning broke over the base with the slow burn of desert light. The horizon glowed orange, shadows stretched long, and the wind carried dust in lazy spirals across the compound. Soldiers stirred, heading toward duty posts, mess hall, or the makeshift gym, their routines as relentless as the rising sun. Collins sat on a bench outside the hangar, Barrett's case resting in her boots. She had already cleaned it again the night before, though it didn't need it. Now it sat closed, gleaming faintly in the dawn light, not as a trophy, but as a tool ready for the next mission. She watched the base come alive, the clatter of trays in the mess hall, the bark of orders near the motor pool, the laughter of a group of younger soldiers sharing a crude joke. None of them knew the weight she carried. They knew the story. Yes, everyone knew by now. The shot had spread across the camp like wildfire, distorted at the edges, each retelling grander than the last. 3 kilometers. No, 4. She dropped 3 men, not 1. The bullet curved in midair like a scene from a movie. Collins listened sometimes from the shadows, half amused, half weary. The truth was simple. 1 shot, 1 man, 1 ambush stopped. But soldiers liked their legends dressed in exaggeration, polished until they gleamed. And yet, she never corrected them. She let the stories grow, because in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was that the convoy had passed safely, men and women alive, because she had done her job. The rest, the records, the legends, was noise. The SEAL commander approached, coffee in hand, his pace unhurried. He sat beside her on the bench without a word. For a long moment, they both watched the sunrise, listening to the low hum of the bass. Finally, he spoke. "They're talking about putting you up for a medal." Collins didn't look at him. Medals don't change anything. He sipped his coffee. They change how people see you. She gave a small shrug. People already see what they want. A medal just makes the stories louder. The commander studied her profile. Calm, steady. But he caught the flicker in her eyes, the same flicker he'd seen in battle-hardened men who carried ghosts. He knew she wasn't dismissing the medal out of arrogance. She dismissed it because it meant nothing compared to the burden of memory. "You know," he said, "most warriors spend their whole careers chasing recognition. You're running from it." Collins smiled faintly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I'm not running. I'm just not interested in being remembered for the wrong reasons." "The wrong reasons?" She nodded. "They'll call it a record, a miracle shot. They'll forget why it was necessary. They'll forget the ambush, the convoy, the lives saved. All they'll remember is the number. A number doesn't carry the truth. The commander leaned back on the bench, exhaling. He admired her more with every conversation. In a world where ego often outpaced skill, Collins was different. She was skill wrapped in humility, precision wrapped in silence. "You know," he said softly, "you could walk away from this. Transfer, train others. Pass on what you know. Leave the record behind and let it speak for itself." Collins shook her head. "Records don't speak. People do. And people always twist the story." For a while, they sat in silence, the kind that carried weight instead of awkwardness. Around them, the base hummed with life, oblivious to the quiet exchange between two soldiers who understood more than they said aloud. At last, Collins stood, lifting the Barrett's case with practiced ease. The commander rose with her. "Heading out?" he asked. She nodded. "Convoy needs overwatch. Another valley. Another mission." He gave her a long look. "You ever take a break?" Her smile was quick and thin. "When the war takes one, I will." She walked through the vehicles, case in hand, braid swaying slightly with each step. The commander watched her go, knowing she would never fully grasp the respect she had earned, not just from him, but from everyone who had heard her story. And yet that was exactly what made her legacy different. Collins didn't want fame. She didn't crave medals or legends. Her legacy wasn't in numbers or records. It was in the silence of the hangar, the steady breath behind the scope, the unflinching resolve to do what was necessary, even when no one else could. It was in the lives of soldiers who would never know how close they had come to death in that valley, never know that a single unseen bullet had rewritten their fate. It was in the respect of those few who understood the Commander Myers, the ones who had seen not just the shot, but the cost. As the sun climbed higher, Collins climbed into the back of the vehicle, Barrett's case beside her. Dust swirled as the convoy rolled out, heading toward another uncertain horizon. She leaned back against the seat, eyes half closed, conserving her strength. She didn't know where the next mission would take her, or whether she would return. She didn't care about the stories that would outlive her, twisted into legend. All she cared about was being ready, being steady, being necessary, because history would remember the shot. But Collins, the woman behind it, preferred to be forgotten. And that was her quiet legacy.